The city of Valoria smelled of rain and wood smoke on the morning Lyra Ashworth walked through its gates with a stranger's name on her lips. She had practiced it for weeks until it no longer felt foreign. Lyra Hale, a girl from the eastern farmlands, looking for honest work. No one needed to know she had once been Lyra Ashworth, daughter of a lord, before her family's name was dragged through the mud of a crime her father never committed. A year had passed since the soldiers came for him. She still remembered the sound of her mother crying, the way the guards had thrown open every cabinet and chest in their home, searching for evidence of treason that did not exist. Her father had been taken to the capital and never returned. The official record said he confessed. Lyra did not believe it for a single moment. Her father had spent his whole life teaching her that truth mattered more than comfort, and she could not accept that he had abandoned that lesson in his final hours. So she had come to the one place she swore she would never set foot in, the royal palace of King Draven Kale, ruler of Valoria and Alpha of all the wolf clans within its borders. It was here that the false charges had been signed. It was here, somewhere in the endless halls and locked archives, that the truth was buried. And it was here that Lyra intended to find it, no matter how long it took, or how low she had to bend to do so. She was hired within a week, one more pair of hands among dozens of maids who kept the palace running. No one looked twice at her. She was careful to keep her eyes down, her voice quiet, her presence forgettable. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles ached, carried trays up flights of stairs that seemed to multiply the longer she worked there, and folded linens in a laundry room that smelled permanently of lavender soap. It was hard work, but it gave her what she needed most: access. Slowly, patiently, she began learning the layout of the palace, which halls led to the private studies, which guards changed shifts when and where the old records might be kept. She did not expect, in the middle of all that careful invisibility, to catch the attention of the king himself. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Lyra was carrying a tray of tea through a narrow servants' corridor that connected the kitchens to the private wing, moving quickly because she was already behind schedule. She turned a corner too fast and nearly collided with a tall man in dark traveling clothes, clearly returning from some errand outside the main halls. She caught herself just in time, murmured an apology, and kept her gaze fixed on the floor as she had trained herself to do around anyone of importance. But the man did not move aside. He stood very still, and when she dared to glance up for just a moment, she saw an expression on his face that she did not understand. It was not annoyance, it was something closer to shock. She did not know, in that instant, that she was standing before the king. She did not know that inside him, a wolf that had never once stirred for another living soul, had suddenly gone utterly silent and utterly certain, the way the sea goes still before the tide turns. She only knew that the stranger's eyes lingered on her far longer than was proper, and that something about his stillness made her heart beat faster than it should have. She bowed quickly, said something about being needed in the kitchens, and hurried away before he could ask her name. Draven Kale did not move for a long moment after she disappeared around the corner. His wolf, the part of him that had guided his instincts since childhood, that had never lied to him even once, was pressed forward against his chest like an animal straining at a leash. It had never done that before. Not for the noble women his council paraded before him at court, not for the warriors and diplomats he had met from every corner of the realm. It had recognized something in a servant girl carrying a tea tray, and it wanted him to follow her. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of exhaustion after a long ride. He had responsibilities that did not allow room for such distractions. An entire kingdom balanced on his shoulders. A council that expected him to marry someone of proper standing before the year was through. He returned to his study and tried to bury himself in reports. But over the following days, his wolf would not let him forget her. He found himself listening for her voice among the staff. He noticed, without meaning to, the particular sound of her footsteps on the stone floors, quick and light, always slightly hurried. When his advisors spoke to him, he found his attention drifting toward the corridors where he had first seen her. He told himself this was foolish. Kings did not chase after maids, but a king's wolf did not lie, and his had never been wrong before. He asked, carefully and without drawing attention, for the name of the new maid who worked the tea service in the private wing. Lyra Hale, he was told, from the eastern farmlands, no family of note. He filed the name away and told himself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more than either of them expected, given how carefully Lyra tried to avoid the private wing whenever she suspected he might be near. She did not know why the tall stranger from the corridor unsettled her so deeply, only that something about him made her want to run, and made her want to stay in equal measure. When she learned, from an offhand comment by another maid, that the stranger had been the king himself, she felt her stomach drop with dread. She had nearly bumped into the king of Valoria, the very throne responsible for her father's disgrace, and he had looked at her as though he recognized her. She resolved immediately to become as invisible as possible. She took the longest routes to avoid the private wing. She asked to be reassigned to the laundry rooms whenever she could manage it, but small moments kept finding her anyway. Once, hurrying down a slick stone staircase with an armload of linens, she lost her footing entirely. Before she could fall, a firm hand caught her elbow and steadied her, and she looked up into the same eyes from the corridor. The king said nothing beyond asking if she was hurt, but he did not let go of her arm until he was certain she had her balance, and something in his careful gentleness left her more shaken than the fall itself would have. Another time, a senior steward scolded her cruelly in front of the other staff for a mistake that had not even been hers, threatening to have her dismissed without pay. She stood there absorbing the humiliation in silence, the way she had learned to do, until an unfamiliar voice cut through the corridor. "That is enough." The steward turned pale and bowed low. The king had appeared seemingly from nowhere, and though his voice was quiet, there was steel beneath it. He corrected the misunderstanding, made clear that the fault lay elsewhere, and dismissed the steward with a warning that silenced any further complaints. Then he looked at Lyra with something softer in his expression, something that made her chest ache in a way she did not want to examine too closely, and walked away without another word. She began noticing other things too. Extra bread left near her station in the kitchens on days she had clearly gone without a proper meal. A warmer cloak appearing in the servants' quarters during the coldest week of winter, given to her specifically though no one admitted to arranging it. She told herself these were coincidences. She told herself she could not afford to feel anything for the king of Valoria, the throne under which her family had fallen. But in quiet moments, when she allowed herself to be honest, she admitted that Draven Kale did not carry himself like the cold, unreachable ruler she had expected. He seemed, if anything, like a man who carried enormous weight entirely alone, and who found in her presence something he did not have anywhere else. Meanwhile, Lyra's true purpose had not been forgotten. Late at night, when the palace slept, she slipped through corridors she had memorized, searching for the old records room, where trial documents from a year past might still be stored. It took weeks of careful searching, narrowly avoiding guards on their rounds, before she finally found what she was looking for, a locked cabinet of sealed case files from the year her father was tried. She could not open it without a key she did not have, but she now knew exactly where the truth was hidden. Her carefulness could not last forever. The head of the royal guard, a sharp-eyed man who trusted no one easily, had grown suspicious of a maid who seemed to know the palace layout better than her short employment should allow. He began quietly investigating her background, and it did not take him long to discover that no Lyra Hale had ever come from the eastern farmlands, and that her true name matched a family whose disgrace was still remembered in certain circles. He brought his findings directly to the king, expecting swift punishment. Instead, Draven felt something colder and sharper than anger settle over him, dread, and beneath it, an unshakable certainty that there was more to this story than a servant's deception. He summoned Lyra to his private study that evening. She arrived already knowing, from the guard's pointed questioning earlier that day, that her secret had unraveled. She stood before the king with her chin lifted despite her fear, prepared to accept whatever punishment came, but unwilling to grovel for it. "You are Lyra Ashworth," Draven said quietly. It was not a question. "I am," she answered, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled at her sides. "Your father was tried for treason in this palace. He was innocent." The words came out fierce and unguarded, a year of grief and fury, finally breaking free. He was framed by men who wanted his lands and his position, and no one in this palace cared enough to look closely at the evidence before they signed his fate. I came here because I had nowhere else to search for the truth. I am not sorry for lying about my name. I am only sorry I did not find the proof in time to save him." Draven studied her for a long moment, and Lyra braced herself for guards, for chains, for the ending she had feared since the day she first walked through the palace gates. Instead, he asked her one simple question. "What proof do you believe exists?" Something in his voice was not the voice of a king protecting his throne. It was the voice of a man asking honestly, wanting to know. Lyra hesitated, then told him everything: the sealed records room, the cabinet she could not open, the conviction she had carried for a year that her father's trial had been built on false testimony. Draven did not dismiss her. He ordered the cabinet opened that same night, under his own authority, with witnesses present to ensure nothing could be hidden or destroyed. What they found inside confirmed everything Lyra had believed and more. The testimony used to convict her father had been signed by men who, records showed, had acquired his lands and titles within months of his execution order. The chain of evidence pointed not to treason, but to a conspiracy reaching into Draven's own council, men who had used the courts to enrich themselves, while a king too new to his throne had trusted their counsel without question. Draven felt the weight of that discovery settle over him like a stone. He had inherited his crown only 2 years earlier, still learning which advisors deserved his trust, and he had unknowingly allowed an innocent man's death to stand unquestioned. It was not a comfortable truth, but he did not look away from it. Over the following weeks, he moved carefully and decisively. The conspirators were identified, questioned, and stripped of the titles and lands they had stolen. The full truth was presented before the royal court, and the Ashworth name, once dragged through disgrace, was formally and publicly cleared. Lyra stood in that courtroom, no longer as a hidden maid, but as the daughter of a wrongly accused lord, watching as the king himself corrected an injustice that had cost her everything. It would have been enough for Draven to simply right the wrong and let her go quietly, restored but distant. He did not choose distance. Before the same court that had cleared her father's name, he spoke of the maid who had walked into his palace with nothing but grief and determination, who had endangered herself for a year to find truth no one else was looking for, and whose heart his own wolf had recognized the very first day their paths crossed in a servant's corridor. Lyra, standing before the court in a plain servant's dress that suddenly felt entirely out of place, listened to the king of Valoria declare in front of his entire kingdom that she was not merely someone he had helped. She was the one his wolf had chosen from the very beginning, long before either of them understood why. The girl who had once scrubbed floors to survive, who had hidden her name and buried her grief to search for a truth others had long since abandoned, now stood beside the throne she had once feared, recognized at last, not for the title she had lost, but for the heart that had never once wavered, even in the deepest disguise.